It's namely me. So let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, Melissa.
Steve Brunner.
Here.
Ron Stanko.
Here.
Bill Jenks will be absent. Dave Reeser.
Here.
And Keith Sher.
Here. Okay. Is there any public comment?
Yes, I do. 1 second. I brought some pictures and a printout from Wikipedia page. I'm sorry I had only 5 copies. If you would kindly share. So this is in comment to, I don't know, agenda item, the thing with the dog bones at the roundabouts. This is one example of a plant that can be used. It's nice, it's hardy. Instead of going to the expense of installing a sprinkler system, maintaining it, using the water. I mean, honestly, I cannot believe we're doing this in this day and age because other municipalities are cutting off on sprinklers. They actually don't allow even residents to use sprinklers because of water shortages. And we're thinking about putting water sprinklers. So there are many other options. This is a Liriope, big blue. I have it in the picture. You have a top, the top is the origin of it. It originates in Japan. And that's how their forests are, the bed of the forests, they're filled with this plant, which is deer resistant. So we've had so many people complaining that deer eats their flowers. So now we're putting flowers in the circles so that deer have what to eat. It just doesn't make sense. So I have it, the bottom picture is my driveway. I have it for a few years now. It kills every weed around it or inside of it. So I don't have to weed it. I don't have to do anything to it. You cut it once a year, run a lawnmower over it, sometimes February, March. Drought resistant, I said low maintenance, heat tolerance. It works in shade as well as sun. Also is erosion control. It's not the case over there, but yes, it can be used on slopes to prevent erosion. So I think that we're rushing into this decision. I think we need to look at other options. Again, this is just one example that I used, and I can guarantee come anytime into my driveway and have a look how it looks. I don't weed it, I don't do anything to it. So again, and on a side note, this is what an environmental advisory commission council would do, is would advise council on other options than going to the expense of drilling and putting a sprinkler system in the circle. And again, I'm hoping that you've been to other countries. We're not the only municipality who has to deal with what they put in their roundabouts. The world has not started and ended in Wyomissing. So there are ways to do it. And honestly, I've never seen sprinklers in roundabouts. So I think that's a useless expense. And going to flowers and other things is gonna be just waste of taxpayer money when we have other options. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Hearing none. Go ahead.
Well, it's great to see everyone. Ron Bittner with Girard Pension Services.
Ron, just keep in mind of our time constraints.
Yes, I'm going to abbreviate. I have an investment report in front of you as of June 30th. I'll just give you some quick highlights. The market this year has continued expansion from last year, 2023. was a very good market period following the 2022 crash or downturn, as we'll see when we look at the MMOs, because that was what was affected by that period. 2023 was a mid double-digit return year. 2024 has continued that. First and second quarters of this year were both positive. We had a little bit of a sell-off in early August, and the market got a little nervous. You know, what's the Fed going to do? Right now, the whole debate discussion is about interest rates. The Federal Reserve has been signaling it is not going to make changes until it sees inflation coming down to close to its target level of 2%, which it's now approaching. And if jobs continue to be strong, they don't want to loosen the labor market to potentially cause more inflation. So right now we're kind of at an inflection point. On the Girard Insights, every quarter our investment team puts together a 2-page summary. I'll let you read that, but you can see Q2 is positive, 12-month numbers were very strong, and that has continued into Q3, and I'll give you an update on that. The story the last year and a half, 2 years has been, large companies have outperformed mid and small, growth has outperformed value. And the biggest drivers have been these mega cap stocks. So, if you heard of the Magnificent Seven on CNBC, it's Google, Apple, Amazon, Tesla, NVIDIA. The 7 largest companies in the world have driven the earnings and the growth in the S&P 500. The other 493 have only added an incremental piece, for most of this year. That's changing now as we enter the second half of 2024, but that has been the story up until this point. So there's a couple of charts in here about the big get bigger, and that's again talking about these mega cap stocks. U.S. though is still the strongest economy. This is on page 5, lower left corner. The U.S. is outperforming the other G7, the other large economies in the world, so that's a good sign. We are in a better position. The Fed, on the next page, interest rates have been at the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate has been at 5.25 now for a couple of years. The expectation is in the September meeting in a week and a half, the Fed will lower interest rates either 1/4 or 0.5%. So they've signaled that, and the market has pretty much priced that into the stock prices at this point and bond prices. So that's what we're expecting, and we also think there'll be another decrease in either November or December, or possibly both. So now they are on the verge of changing policy and lowering interest rates. So the market's eagerly awaiting, that, and but again, a lot of that has already been priced into stock prices. Inflation is coming down. Let's see if I flip to page 8. The Fed funds, or the Fed long-term inflation target is 2%, and we're approaching that. It's just a little bit higher, 2.5, but it's coming down every month, and so the trend is good. The Fed, I think, is going to be comfortable changing rates as inflation keeps falling. Next page, is it time for mid and small caps? So when interest rates peak and start to come down again, smaller companies can go to the market, obtain funding for expansion or facilities or building new factories. A lot of capital expenditures have been postponed because of the higher rates. So as rates start to come down, we'll see more activity in smaller companies, and their stock prices will improve following that at some point. A little bit in here about election. We usually get questions, what do you do in advance of an election? Well, a couple things. One, volatility increases prior to and just after an election. And volatility just means there'll be more days of larger ups and downs, more than 1 or 2% changes in a day. That's to be expected. It happens every cycle. But we are long-term investors. These plans, pension plans, are indefinite, meaning they have no end date, and so we're not going to change strategy, trying to anticipate what might happen. The chart on page 10 just kind of shows that we can prove whatever result that we would like to prove if we change the time period. So if you look at one time period, one, side is higher or the other side. So, it's not really, relevant to look at, what party, but what's more important to Wall Street is what policies come out of an administrative change or a change of Congress. Will it be more pro-business, lower taxes, that sort of thing? Not so much who the individuals are in what particular seats. So that's the message here. We won't be making any strategic moves because of that. So, page 12, don't concentrate, don't react to media. Again, for long term, we have that view all the time. Valuation landscape, page 13. Valuations are kind of high from a historical perspective. This September, we've seen a couple days of a mild correction maybe starting. September generally is a negative month, but preceding Q4, historically, the fourth quarter is the best quarter of the year. So I think a lot of folks out there are repositioning, taking some profits off the table that they've accumulated through 8 months, and getting ready for these interest rate cuts and seeing where they're going to position, going into Q4. So we're pretty positive on the remainder of this year. So flipping to the Wyomissing Borough Police Pension Summary, you can see there, second quarter was slightly positive. First quarter was up quite a bit. Year to date, as of June 30, up 6.11%, a little slightly higher than the benchmark there. And just as an update, July and August were very good months. The portfolios gained another 4.5% through August. So right now, all three plans are right around 10.5% year-to-date return. And like I said, first 2 days of this week, there's been a little bit of a sell-off, but it's to be expected. And as we go into Q4, we should see some more expansion, and it will turn out to be another, really good year.
Okay.
And the next page is just the asset allocation. If you recall, this is 65-35 mix. So there's 65% in equities, 50 in domestic, and 12 international, and a little bit of real estate position. And all three portfolios are managed the same way, have the same allocation, just different dollar amounts based on their size. And returns for all three are very similar. Anybody have any questions? Anything that you touch on further on the results?
You don't recommend any changes to the portfolio at all?
We are, let's see, yes, on
Stuff, right.
the FI 360, yeah, that score sheet there you see on page 2 of 11, that brown cap for small management. It's a small cap fund that we've held for some time, and we didn't want to sell it at the absolute bottom 9-12 months ago, but that fund either has or will be replaced now. We found a replacement fund, another small cap manager to fill that position. So it's recovered. It has had a decent second and third quarter, and that will be a replacement. We don't recommend any change in the allocation strategy, but fund by fund, that will be a change, and we may add a little bit more into one of the international pieces. Internationals also may pick up a little bit. They're less valuations are better than the U.S. stocks right now.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about that? Comments? Yeah. And then the non-uniform pension is 6.6%, which is right around the portfolio, the target.
Yep.
Benchmark.
Yeah, towards the end, the last 4 sheets, you see the non-uniform pension plan, same information. cumulative charts there.
And are they up the same amount?
Yep, all three plans.
Through August.
Yep, through August, around 4.3, 4.4,
The firefighters are a little bit below the benchmark, not significantly. Okay.
but very similar.
I assume they're up and all through July and August also.
Correct.
Any questions regarding the status of where we are today? Hearing none, we'll move on to the, I guess we have to make a motion for the MMO payment. Is that what we gotta do now?
Yeah, past practice has had us make payments each quarter. We've
Okay.
made one for the first and second quarter. The state aid will not be available until later in the month. So staying on our usual schedule, we would be due to make a quarterly MMO payment. The recommended payment is just 1/4 of the liability between what's expected from the state and what was computed as the MMO. So I'm recommending payment of a total among the plans, $55,576.75 for the third quarter, to be paid before the end of September.
We're gonna make that
I'll
motion.
make that motion.
Make a motion to make the Q3 MMO payment in the amount of $55,576. And how many cents?
75.
75 cents.
Second.
Motion to second. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, let's hear the bad news.
Ron, do you wanna lay it out, or? I can do it if you want, but.
Go through your chart, I'll answer.
All right. The MMO calculation is a function of the estimated wages for the current year and applying the valuation factors that were derived from our most recent valuation, which was 1/1/23. Unfortunately, that is when the market was down, and so it has a negative impact on the normal cost and the amortization of that liability. So our MMO is going up significantly. For 24, we chose not to use the 23 valuation results, but we used the 21 valuation results to minimize the impact on the budget. Now it's time to pay up. So that when we apply the 23 valuation factors to estimated wages of 6.1, the proposed MMO is $1,568,000. The estimated state aid that would offset that is approximately $522,000. So this is a action that would need to be adopted again by the end of September. How it compares to the prior year, the MMO for 24 totaled $837,000. Using the new valuation factors, that number jumps to $1,568,000. The state aid does go up because there are additional units to be certified based on recent hires. You can see the net effect going from $355,000 to over $1 million, which is something that needs to be in the 2025 budget.
And there's no options.
Yeah, I was
Right.
gonna say, what's their decision?
You can't defer it again.
No.
2025, yeah, has to reflect those. The biggest component of those was the amortization. So the investment losses for 2022 increased the unfunded liability, and that gets amortized over a period of time.
Ron,
That
what you see is the
amortization.
police in front of you.
Yeah, so here's a comparative chart between the two valuations on the police plan. The normal cost increased slightly, payroll base, the percentage went down a little bit, so that's just a factor of your population. But the unfunded liability, the liabilities increased, but the asset value dropped, so that gap widened significantly. And so the amortization went from 42,000 to 496,
For just the police plan.
just the police. The other two plans had the same impact, just not to that extent. You wanna show that page 13?
Page of this report.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so as of 1/1/19, the police plan was slightly overfunded, if you recall. You had to put some additional funding, you got over 100%, all the amortization went away at that point. Then 1/1/21, interest rate assumption was lowered, lists other factors that read in the first basis. And then 1123.
Yeah, I know.
So that amortization period is 14 years for this most recent increment. The other two plans have a number of different bases that adds up to the total.
And what are we using for the assumed rate of return again?
I believe we're at 7%.
Yeah, continue, there's the assumption chart is, I think, after this. Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah, there. And you're on a path to get to 6.5
6.5 is the
at some point.
target.
All right, so we sitting here with a $700,000 hole in the budget for next year right off the bat. With wages increasing, no one's report. Just out of curiosity, this is because of the downturn at the end of 23, right?
22.
22, sorry.
Yep.
Right, the
2022.
valuation was 1,123.
2022 was much more significant than a lot of people thought. It was the worst market since the 08 banking crisis crash.
No, I know.
But yes, it was right at the measurement date, and so the balance at the end of that year
And
decreased.
sadly enough, if we did it today, it wouldn't be anywhere near the $700,000.
Right. Now we have 2 years of 30% return roughly.
And this last 2 years, correct?
Yeah.
So this, we're gonna be hanging on to the 2020.
No, not necessarily. This increase can be changed after 2025. We do the valuation as soon as possible and have the new valuation with 23 and 24 results for your 26 MMO. So we can take advantage of that after only 1 year.
So it's a 1 year, it's a one, well, as of right now, it's a 1 year shot in the arm.
So when we deferred it for the current year, we could adopt it for 26 budget.
There was no additional payments into the budget for 24, was there?
No.
I think it was kept out.
The MMO was all that was
Right,
budgeted,
no
and we
additional.
have not made any
No.
additional payments.
John Gallon wanted us to.
Yeah, which is, I don't know.
Potentially, there'll be excess paid in, depending on how much state aid is received. When we get our state
Right.
aid, we can adjust the fourth quarter contribution if we choose to do so.
Yeah, knowing what's coming next year, you probably want to create or accumulate whatever reserve or funds you can to pay next year's obligation rather than pre-funding it this year.
So
Because you'll get-
$700,000 right off the bat.
We must budget the expense of 1.5 and the anticipated revenue of 522. So the net effect is, yes. No, the net effect is 1,046,000.
I think Steve's talking about the difference between this
But
year.
700,000.
Oh, for this
That was
year,
about
yes.
this
The
year.
difference
I'm just
between-
about the budget
Yes,
from
yes.
this year to next year.
Yes.
Right,
Okay.
increase over.
All right, well, we can sit here and muddle over and be pissed all we want, there's not much we can do about it, right?
No, it's just something you can do about it when budget time comes.
No, obviously, yeah. My boss is a road.
Or two, or a dump truck, or
Yeah.
3 dump trucks, 2 police
Okay.
cars.
So action is needed to adopt the proposed MMO.
All right, so we need a motion to approve the new MMO calculation, which is a net roughly $700,000 increase for the 2025 budget year.
Correct.
So moved.
Motion. Second. Motion to second. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Start cutting. All right. Next on the list, long-term financing options. Thank you so much. Listen, I sell health insurance.
Ron, thank you for getting everything.
Sure thing. don't envy your work.
And not to talk about spending more money.
I have it.
Well, the good news is we don't need to go through a market update since you just had one, so thank you very much, Ron.
And there are, we do have a.
We're gonna make this quick as we can be. Although we have several pages here, we're really gonna touch on about 5 of them, which is
Sure
good
thing.
news.
Thank you.
And we have 2 goals here from this conversation, really is to narrow down concepts of what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to the financing opportunities, a timeline, and talk about what we call the dual track process, which we've touched on during the last meeting. So I think between those 3 things, I think we can move pretty quickly. So thanks again for your time. Obviously, we're happy to work with you. We brought a new colleague with us who's working with us on this team, is Cole Thayer, who's one of our new analysts. Garrett and I will kind of handle the primary work here going forward. Important to point out, Michelle and Phyllis provided us some estimates of the municipal building expansion or renovation as a guide for some conversation. So when you see this presentation, there are actually 4 options being shown for the purposes of the borrowing amounts potentially, to give you as a finance committee an opportunity to see the impacts of each option. Obviously, the decision points of what you may or may not want to do is clearly dependent on the project itself, but you can at least get an idea of what the payments could be if we do it a certain way. So you just want to flip through a couple pages in.
And I should note, I mean, there's 4 options in here. Each option has the same 3 pages, so once you kind of understand one, the rest of the presentation is the exact same, but again, just tweaking and borrowing amounts a little bit to get to the final project cost for each option.
So we're going to touch on this page to give you an idea of some thought processes here. So this is a starting point of an idea for a construction cash flow. And the way we have been thinking about this is big picture. It's the idea of doing both the permanent financing of the existing debt and the considerations for the potential of police building and borough hall renovations or new building, along with the fire truck as well. So you put all those things together from a planning purpose of how we would implement the transaction itself. An important distinction here is, based on conversations with staff, because of the anticipated draw schedule or a timeline for the Borough Hall building, it did ultimately force us to consider doing this with 2 transactions if you go down this road. And that is because of the reasonable expectations to spend the money within 3 years. So that does make things a little easier from decision points for you sitting on this side of the table. But again, important here, our viewpoint is, and the way we've considered this is 2 steps and doing this as kind of 2 less than $5 million transactions to provide a couple of values, and we'll touch on those in the top of the discussion page. But okay, concept number 1 is the uses side is, here's the amount of money you potentially need, here's the reimbursement amount, here is the assumed draw schedule for Borough Hall. Obviously, we'll get some new estimates for that as time goes on. And then on the sources side is anticipated disbursements that come from the various funds that could be coming from any transaction and or grant anticipation. So important to point out is there'd be about, if you do a $5 million issue for the bond or a bank loan, it'd be about $4.9 million of balance. We had some borough funds that you had set aside associated with the fire truck acquisition, and then we made some assumptions of interest earnings for the deposit of construction funds. We hope conservative, but you just heard a few minutes ago that there's an anticipation of the Fed reducing rates over the next coming months. So the current estimates that you're receiving is about 5.25% from Pliget. So if we drop this down to a 3.5%, I think that's still reasonably conservative. And based on these draw schedule, this gives you an idea of what you need. Questions on this? Frankly, this page is kind of shown throughout the presentation.
Yep.
The main difference is just really the deposit amounts of the borrowings if you choose to go down that road based on the different alternatives. But the grand scheme of things, we're trying to end up with a balance of 0 once we decide on the project itself.
And again, this will change a little bit as you get more information on the projects, as we get more information on the timing of the reimbursement, things of that nature. But this is really what we use as a roadmap to kind of plan and, more importantly, size each of the financings to be the most appropriate, so that at the end of the day, you're not left with extra borrowed money that you're paying interest on and don't have any projects for.
So what's the net, estimated cost of the public works building after the state reimburses us?
2.1.
So we're anticipating to finance 4.2 for $5 million to pay off 2.1.
No, sort of.
Yeah, we won't be reimbursed until we have long-term financing in place.
Yeah,
Understood.
you gotta start with the full amount first.
Right.
Then you get the money, and it's I hate to say a little bit of a shell game here. You get the money in, and based on a conversation we heard from the last meeting, we believe we can transfer those funds potentially into the new project, or we can use it to reduce principal. Those are kind of your two.
Okay, so
You end up with
the
same
option,
number.
any of these options allow you to reduce the principal
Yeah,
after that reimbursement.
Exactly right. So it's just really a matter
So
of
to
common
be clear, we're
sense.
borrowing 4.2 with the full intent, well, at least my full intention is to take the 2.1 we get from the state to reduce the 4.2 to 2.1.
Or reduce the second transaction, one of those two. That's your options.
The other thing to keep in the back of your minds here is the CFA is supposed to meet next Friday, and we have a pending $5 million grant request for Borough Hall and Public Works.
Well,
Is that a match?
No, well, yeah, I'm sorry, yes, 50%. So
So
if
to-
we would get 5 million, we'd have to match up to 5 million, but so far the project isn't gonna cost 10 million, so you could scale that down, yes.
And to your point, that's why we have it estimated in, what is that, beginning of 25 is the 2.1 million
yeah, I see the 2.1.
reimbursement. So we're trying to factor in, again, does that 2.1 come in January 25? Who knows, frankly.
But what I don't want us to get into is borrowing money and then getting all jolly and happy about we have all this money and spending it all on.
That is
shit
your,
we
so,
don't-
good
yeah.
point. So you have there's two things that'll hold you to that, is one, the ordinances that you would adopt will specifically describe what the purposes of the projects are, and then two, every disbursement that's made, it comes before council, when you make determinations, so the decision of spending the money is entirely on you. So we have those two roadmaps to kind of keep you in lane.
Long-term debt should not.
Yeah.
What's
Okay,
that?
you can,
What's that?
Long-term debt should not be Christmas time.
Couldn't agree with you more.
yeah, no, we want to avoid as much debt as possible, we just want to do it the right way. Turn to the next page,
You don't
please.
have Christmas budget.
Page 3.
This is,
Oh, yeah, this
so
one.
that may page six.
This one?
One, can you go one up? One more up, sorry. There we go. Briefly want to touch on these, we went to the right page, which is good. This is really just some topics of discussion for purposes of how we're thinking about it. We have a few steps that we have to consider. One is reasonable expectations to spend the money within 3 years. There's a federal tax law requirement that's kind of highlighted in the top part. There is a special exemption within any municipal borrowing that if you issue $5 million less in a calendar year, and in the fact that there's a refinancing involved here, you have some additional flexibility. There's a special small issuer exemption under tax code to allow you to borrow funds at a lower rate and reinvest at a higher rate and keep the money in between. So conceivably, if nothing changes in the interest rate environment for what you can borrow at and what you can earn at, you can potentially earn about 1% additional that you can keep to go toward capital projects. If we go above that $5 million mark, that concept disappears. The second step could be if you spent the money fast enough, there's a special exemption for that. That's a little harder to get to. So from our viewpoint, if we can push toward the smaller exemption, makes a lot of sense from our perspective. Bank qualifications, another important point here. Spending and issuing $10 million in a calendar year or less gives you a special exemption and gets you lower interest rates and a shorter call provision for your options for the bonds. So in both the alternatives we're talking about fits within that time period. And then finally, the last two are really just structuring and timing process and more the legal side. Should you make any considerations of doing a transaction, there will be an option called a parameters ordinance, where we would come back to council after a proper advertisement in the Reading Eagle, and we would authorize debt issuance using what is called a parameters ordinance that establishes a maximum borrowing amount, maximum interest rate, maximum final maturity, and all other terms and conditions associated with any transaction. What's important here is it will be higher than what you're borrowing and higher interest rate than you expect, but this gives us flexibility to when we go to the bond market or bank loan market, we have the structuring in place.
So just to elaborate on that a little bit, it. So the maximum amount, typically the rule of thumb is to take whatever you think you're gonna borrow and add 20% to it. So in the case of a $5 million loan, we would make the parameters for around $6 million. Again, we would only issue the amount to fund the project, so we'd only issue $5 million, but we need that extra room, if you will, to move the bonds around based on the pricing.
Finally, dual track process. Given the historical relationship, given the strength of the borough itself, and given the timing that we may be able to make this work, we believe we should go through a two-step process to get the best alternative, and go through a process to determine a bank loan alternative, and then a comparison to the bond market. And we have a timeline in the back of here that would map that out to allow us to complete this within this calendar year if necessary. Turn to the next page, please. Actually, turn to page 6.
So this should look very similar to the last time we were here presentation. So again, this is option A. Option A should match to the total project amount that's listed in the 4 options you were provided as far as the project goes. So the total borrowing amount, again, matches with option A that you see in the handout that you all received before. Again, this option A is structured as a 15-year financing. So again, in the blue, you can see we're running at a 15-year level debt service of about $440,000, and then in the yellow, we're kind of wrapping around the blue, if you will. So that's why you see the payments are a little less at $350,000, and then out in 2040, there's a larger payment of around $800,000. All that, when it fits together, leaves you with column 7, which is an annual run rate of about $800,000 a year.
So if the perfect window came in where we borrowed funds with step 1, and as you learned about the CFA, as you made some determinations on the project itself, there may not be a step B. So, we would make that determination at that time to do the yellow potentially, and if you don't, you'd just be looking at the estimated payments in the blue column. There is a little wiggle room in phase-in of your debt service payments. So just hearing earlier about your MMO increase for this year on your budgetary impact, that we can definitely work, if necessary, a structure where there'd be no principal paid in 25, and we could also borrow additional funds called capitalized interest, and technically have no budget impact at all on your debt service. Not surprising, when you do that, it would cost you more money overall because you're borrowing funds and paid interest, but I'm only throwing it out there just given conversation. But again, that's details we can talk about later, but I wanted to point that out as an option. Questions on this page, and frankly, the balance are just going to be permutations of this, except going to a 20-year amortization.
Exactly.
So if you want to turn to the next page.
Yep, so page 7, as Jamie mentioned, the exact same format, the exact same project, only difference being we're going out an extra 5 years. So we're going out 20 years as opposed to 15 years, and you can see in column 7, again, the structure all remains the same, but in column 7, instead of a run rate of about $800,000 a year, your run rate is about $670,000 a year. Again, it's always that, as we talked about before, it's that balancing act between, similar to your home mortgage, between you go out longer, you might pay more interest over the life of the loan, but you have a lesser annual payment, as opposed to going with a shorter amortization, pay less over the life of the loan in interest, but your annual payments are higher. And again, just a balancing act. But given these projects that you're talking about for all, long standing projects, projects that are going to be around for a number of years, going out 15 years, 20 years is certainly appropriate.
And I would also add one more point. If you look at the borrowing rate in the middle of the pages on both slides, because of the yield curve right now, the difference between 15 and 20 years is about 10 or so basis points. It's not a big difference in an overall interest rate. So, we think 20 years would make sense, and then it gives you flexibility. When you get cash, you could always pay down the principal on the previous years. So,
if we get the grant reimbursement, make the principal pay down on the step 1 portion of the financing, does that readjust the payment, or do we keep the same payment structure going forward?
You'd maintain the same dates of payments, but what would happen is we call the bonds at the end, so it would ultimately pick off the principal payments up to $2.1 million. So And that's probably
So you
4 or 5
basically
years.
cut the length of the loan almost in half.
So the payments in the blue would remain the same?
No, I should put that,
Okay.
the interest would kick up lower because you have less principal outstanding.
Mhm.
So you would have a lower payment because of that. Your principal would stay the same for those initial years.
Okay.
Your interest would be less.
The interest, so the payment would adjust by the interest amount only.
Right.
So we're still gonna see, we're not gonna cut the payments in half if we pay half the principal balance down.
You'll cut a pretty significant
It'll
amount
be
down.
just about that.
It'll be just
We can
about-
provide you with, we can pick any of the scenarios you'd like to see, we can show you an illustration of, based off of an assumed timing of when you might receive the grant reimbursement, what the net effect might look like, assuming you issue the bonds or bank loan, and then you receive $2 million, $2.1 million to pay it off. We can show you what that would be.
You're not gonna be able to re-amortize it per se. I mean, we could get, I'll let you go down the road.
No.
Yeah, we could go really crazy into fees, every maturity by a certain.
Yeah, I mean,
It would just be
I'm
a real pain.
more like the high level, there'll be an impact to the payment
Yes.
when we make that principal payment.
Yes.
Essentially cut it off by 5 years.
Cut off by what?
Cut it off by about 5 years. Because it's about, $400,000.
5 years at the end of the term.
Yes.
Not affecting the 362, 707.
You'd reduce the maturity by about 5 years, and it would reduce the annual payment by the interest that kicks up from the bond amount, which would get you there. So maybe it's, 200, give or take.
Just a little more tolerable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Turn, just next page, actually, unless you really want to see, just given time constraints,
All
the
the
balance of the presentations are just a small permutation on smaller, different borrowing amounts based on the estimates of the different options. So it's really between $6 and, $9 million $5 and $6 million of the second building.
We would also note that in at least one of the options that is, at least in front of you for your consideration, I believe there might be some proceeds that might come from a sale of property. Again, to the extent that option was selected and you received any proceeds from a sale of whatever property, those proceeds as well could then be used to pay off the whatever loan early as well. Again, we're not guesstimating on what that amount might be, but just note that to the extent there is anything of that nature, any funds of that nature that come in, those proceeds, those funds could be used to prepay the loan early as well.
Yeah.
Presumably, assuming that's what your all's desire.
I'll stop. Does anyone want to see the other options? We're happy to run through it. Okay. So I think the next step would go to page 20, which is essentially the second to last page. So this is a traditional timeline that we use as a guide for both PFM administration and of course council and the rest of the team to use to plan for what could be a transaction. And this is an illustrative assumption that we utilize what we call the dual track process, which gives us an ability to look at both bank loan opportunities and then comparing it to the bond market. In some cases, we can do multitasking. That's why it's kind of that highlighted in like the beige of things that would happen at the same time. And then there's some specific things that are tied to the bond issue, tied to the bank loan. You'll notice on the right-hand side, which is the red, would be the bank loan. So our suggestion here is that we would go out for indications of a bank loan transaction within the next couple of weeks, assuming Council of Finance feels comfortable with an assumption here. We probably ask for some guidance on term, either 15 or 20 years. I believe 20 makes sense, but we could ask the banks to give us 15 or 20-year proposals back. We really then need to narrow down which one to choose, of course, at that point in time, but we can do that.
And I would note at that point going out, again, in either of the scenarios that we have outlined with first borrowing, it's about $5 million. Again, that pays off the interim loan, as well as gives you some, let's call it seed money, $700,000 or so to go towards projects. So we don't necessarily need to know, going out for bank loans, which of the options the borough ultimately wants to move forward with, as long as you feel comfortable moving forward with one of the projects.
So you really only need a decision on borrowing the first $5 million.
Specifically-
The second step is irrelevant to the first step.
Correct. That is definitely true. And as we get proposals back and we make a decision on bond versus bank, then we really need to know the exact borrowing amount, because you have less flexibility as you move down the process, just because of rating processes, putting together the documentation and other things associated.
When you say the full amount, you mean step one and step
It's
two?
just step one.
Just step one.
Just step one.
Okay.
I'm just talking about when we get to an ordinance and other things like that.
And $5 million seems to be the number that you stay below to allow you to have some other benefits.
It has every benefit you want out of a transaction.
And knowing that the vast majority of 5 million, again, 4.2 plus or minus, is required to pay off the interim loan. So really, the difference is, again, 700,000 or so that could go towards any of these projects.
And the fire truck.
That's what it's gonna go to.
So there you go.
Assume
We don't
we,
have to borrow any money after that.
assume we do a bank loan, the first step. The second step, if we decide to be a bond issue, do a bond. We could do both?
Absolutely.
No restrictions on that?
Realistically, I think if we get to step 2, you know, at some point in the future, we'll probably end up doing a process similar to this. Just again, it's doing our due diligence. The borough's doing its due diligence. It's, you know, being transparent. It's looking at all of its options. So again, unless for whatever reason, you know, you all feel strongly not to, I think we would recommend, again, if step 2 comes, doing a very similar process.
We have less of a time constraint with step 2
Sure.
at this point in time, and I know
We
the
have
associate
that
wants the money in the
We have
bank.
to have this in by the end of this calendar year, correct?
Yes. Yeah, so that's what drives this. So I'm going to touch on some of the important decision points here. So one, obviously for today's conversation, is really narrowing down the concepts here. We've already begun asking for some information from administration to get things together on both options, both bond and bank. Some of the things that are for the bond we can use for the bank, so it makes it work pretty well. We ask, because of the timing here, we've asked to send out the RFP to some form of a distribution by mid-September.
The RFP to the banks.
Back to the banks, yeah. At that same time, there is a possibility, depending on which way we go, we may want to expand financial professionals, that we can determine who they are at a later date. So if we go down the road of a bond issue, you know, certainly Chris would have an impact on this. We could be working with a specific bond counsel that specializes in bonds. But if we do a bank loan, that has a little different conversation. So I wanted to point that out, that we would have some future discussions, but that should start to happen as this process goes on. We would ask, because of the timing it takes banks to review, you know, creditworthiness and going through their committees, it takes them a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So we probably get proposals back, probably the 2nd or 3rd, actually the 2nd of October. That would allow us to review the proposals and come back to your finance committee in October to review those results and give you some, you know, formal analysis and advice on which direction that we suggest going.
Results when?
The 3rd, I believe that's your next.
Well, that, we would get the results prior to the 3rd, but then
Okay.
the 3rd is when we would
You would come
ultimately be in
back.
front of you to present the results
Got it.
and
Yep.
have a further conversation on the bank.
Yep. And then, assuming we make a decision on which way to go, you know, council can report back to the rest of the team, and we can make some. There's various decisions: authorized to advertise for ordinances, potentially decision to accept the bank proposal, or make a decision on which method to sale. All those things can happen at one meeting, and depending on which way you go, we either start doing the blue, or we just continue forward with the red.
Good.
That is it all, but key here is if an approval happens and we submit to DCD sometime before November, we will settle before the end of the year. That's the timeline. It takes about 30 days from the day you approve to approval from the state. So that's why December 31st, that's what we're backing into.
So when you're thinking in your head as far as timeline, all actions from this board need to be made in November.
Right.
In order to have the money enclosed this year.
So you don't have a choice, is what you have to do. I'll make a motion that the finance committee recommends council move forward with step 1 of the $5 million loan investigation.
Second?
There's not a motion on the agenda, but I can do it under my manager's report. We didn't know where the conversation was going when we had to put the agenda together.
So based on this timeline, you don't know what you have to do this year.
So, I mean, I can just do it under my manager's report for council
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
Yeah, I guess maybe we'll say we recommend it to the council to follow the agenda.
agenda.
It's
not an emergency.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, I
we,
think
we can
handle it.
continue on kind of doing what we need to do in order to have kind of the button ready to press, and we'll tell us to press it.
This is next Tuesday night.
Yeah, exactly. So we're more than happy, we can gin up a bank loan RFP, we can gin up, distribution list for that for everyone to review. So that ultimately, should you decide that, yep, we're a go, the day after, a couple days after, we can click the send button.
We don't have much of a choice, like he said, so.
From a timing standpoint, you know, the good news is if we get bank proposals back and we hate them, you can reject them, there's no cost to it.
Right.
Hypothetically, if interest rates go down significantly in a year or two, it's possible the borough might want to refinance this first borrowing. Is that part of what you need to incorporate into your solicitation for proposals?
That's a good
Is
question.
the right of the borough to refinance this
Yes.
financing?
Yeah, so we, in our RFPs, we put down pre-payable anytime is preferred. There are some financial institutions that have to put some form of a call provision in their document, which is part of our evaluation. So the possibility that that bank gives the best fixed rate proposal, but they have a call provision in 3 or 4 years, versus another bank that has a pre-payable anytime with a penalty with a worse interest rate, we have to decide what the value of that is.
But frankly, that's our job
Yeah.
as your financial advisor, to present all the information to you in a digestible way so that you can say, okay, well, if loan A is prepayable at any time, but it has a higher rate than loan B, but loan B, I can't prepay the loan except after year 3, then that becomes a decision point. But we certainly ask in the proposal that it's preferred that the loan is prepayable anytime without a penalty.
And also,
Yeah,
on the other
because we
side-
have the intention, at least I have the intention of
Paying
taking
principal.
2.1 million and
And
putting
just
it
throwing
right
it
to
at
the
it.
loan.
Yep.
Right.
100%.
Yep.
And we can disclose that in the RFPs, that, you know,
There's a grant coming.
the borough's the recipient of a grant, finding TBD, but the estimated amount is 2.1 million. Just so that everyone's, has the same page, everyone knows going into the RFP that,
And they may be able to build that into their pricing as a special exemption for those one-off banks that have to have a call provision. They can say, we'll take borough funds one time, and that there's no penalty. That's a possibility too.
On the other side, if interest rates were to go up, will your proposal solicitation include caps or, I mean, with a
Yes.
15 or 20 year term, I would anticipate you're not gonna get fixed for the entire.
You will get a few from some banks. If you go to 20, there's probably 2 or 3 banks that give us fixed rate for 20 years. 15 years, maybe it's 3-ish banks. We will get plenty of banks that give 5-year fixed rates with a cap at 9%. That's why there's some value in other products potentially, if it makes sense.
and to your point, as you know, I mean, to the extent you get a bank loan that has a variable rate component to it, i.e. after year 5 it's variable, pursuant to state law, there has to be a cap rate. So, you know, Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth is looking out for its local governments and telling basically the banks that if you're gonna provide a variable rate to our municipalities, it has to come statutorily with a cap rate.
If we were to go to the bond market today, what are those rates look like?
Great question. I sold bonds yesterday for the Borough of Manheim. 20-year issuance, probably worse credit to you and more back-end loaded, it was 4%. We got bank proposals in yesterday for Borough in Western PA, O'Hare. I'm sure
That was
it is.
Western PA,
Yeah.
Westmoreland County, I
Yeah,
think.
10 years, 4%. So,
We had a school district, not to brag either, but it's a highly rated school district out in the Montgomery County area, 15-year financing, and their all-in rate was under 3%.
Under 3.
Under 3.
How much are they borrowing? We'll take that.
2.9.
Yeah, how much are they borrowing?
it was a lot.
30 million, it was a refinancing. So they were refinancing 2 of their bonds.
Bank or bond?
Bonds.
Those are bonds. So, bank comparison we got yesterday was 4% for 10 years fixed. Wide range, by the way, that was the best proposal. Bond issue, 20 years, 4%. I think you guys will be rated higher than this one, but I want to give you some idea.
And again, part of our job, get bank loan proposals, put them in front of you, but then at the end of the day, also compare them to what the bond market looks like, so you can make the most informed decision.
How do we determine 5 million for the first
Well, we need to do 4.2 just for the borough garage, because you gotta finance the entire piece.
No.
And you have the fire.
Before reimbursement.
Yep,
Correct.
and then you have the fire truck
And
as
then the
well,
fire truck.
and some cost of issuance, and we just backed into $5 million essentially. It will not be exactly 5 million on bond issue, as you
Yeah,
point out,
but-
but it's gonna be close. Like, bond math, but
Let's say we have $600,000 for the truck outstanding, 650,
Okay,
so
okay,
And,
4.2 and 650 is
okay.
485.
Therefore we are. All right, thank
it
you.
kind of works very perfectly, sadly.
And I wanna be very clear to everybody here, I don't wanna borrow a penny more than we need to borrow.
Yeah.
We don't need to be paying off our day-to-day stuff with a loan that we just got money with.
We have to do the full garage, 4.2 on the
We have
garage,
to do the
we
whole
can't,
thing. Right, we have to show that we
we
financed.
can't reflect
You'll get, for
reimbursement.
what it's worth, you'll get the rating agencies, the banks, they'll give you some credit for this. They know you're gonna pay it back in some capacity, but understand you have to finance it. And honestly, you're not gonna pay any more cost of issuance borrowing 2.5 versus 5 in the grand scheme of things, outside of a couple of nickels and dimes with size of transaction, few and fine. But in the grand scheme of things, you must as well do the max amount you need to do, you gotta do it anyway, and there's really no major impact.
and then we can always come back at a later date, once the interim loan is taken out, once the truck is paid off. Again, if you decide to move forward, at that point, that can be a separate conversation, you know, for next year.
But you have those numbers for budgetary concepts.
Did we set a meeting yet for the budget? Are we gonna use that early yet?
We will set the first meeting at our next finance meeting.
Okay.
We have to put that on the agenda.
I wasn't the head of this department a year ago when we were running all the money. I forgot when we said it.
I'll try to have some
My 2
projections.
cents
I'm the one
is,
who's gonna get shot.
I would put in your budget between $300,000 and $400,000 of debt service for next year. And
Plus
if-
700,000.
Plus $700,000 for your MMO. And if we need to do some adjustments to the structuring to reduce that impact, I'd rather you have a higher number in there now
Sure.
and come back and adjust.
Start lower. Okay,
That's what we got. That was fast, right?
that was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work. Thanks.
And again, any questions come up in the
I
meantime?
can go single properties.
Single property, okay.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We're gonna hold the results to the very end, I think. I wanna get everything we need to vote on before.
Okay. The things that we need
So
to
the
take
cash
action
update, we
on.
need to do something with Pliget.
We do. With Pliget, 9.9 million is the current balance, 2 million of that is terms. The first will be maturing on September 12th. What we have been doing is just letting it roll into class to keep it liquid for you. If you look at the future interest rates, Pliget still remains above 5. It doesn't drop, the terms don't drop below 5 until the end of January of 25. And that would, of course, be dependent on what happens with the Fed and the election.
And class is 5.07 right now.
Correct.
I'll make a recommendation, we put the maturing Pliget funds for September 12th into the Pliget class fund.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to second, any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
The other item of action is advancing on the line, or excuse me, not line,
Okay.
no. During August, 261 was advanced, bringing the note balance to 2,683,000. That continuing growth is what we'll be refinancing. To pay the payment apps, that will be approved next week, as well as engineering fees already incurred, and the monthly fee to Berkey. I'm requesting an additional advance in the amount of $284,396.13.
Okay. We have a motion to draw the Tompkins General Obligation Note, amount of $284,396.13. We have a second to that. Second. We We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Oh, I didn't say aye. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I abstain, is what I'm trying to spit out.
Other items of action, item number 8, the resolution.
It's pretty self-explanatory. The intent is to apply for a category 4 local share account. I'll be coming back likely in the next 2 months with a request to then reapply for the statewide share account. There's different pots of money that are all funded through the revenue taken in from the casinos, which is what the share accounts are. But this is the first step. It's within a 4-county radius, and we are requesting $1 million to be used towards Borough Home Police Department. There's no match.
Do you have any, other than,
No match. Can't get that.
do you have any specific plans for the million? Are you just saying we're gonna use it?
What is the timeline that we would have it for? That we'd have to use it
To
by?
use it, typically within 2 years, but you can request time extensions for.
So it could be for something new, it could be for something improved. it
So
could be
we
for-
don't know at this point.
Right, but if we're gonna have a chance to get $1 million with no match, why wouldn't we apply for it?
Without having specific plans.
We have no plans.
Okay,
What's the
that's all I
downside?
wanted to
There's no
know.
downside.
Okay. All right,
We have no plans at this point.
okay.
All right, so we need an adoption of the resolution as required by submission, so we need a motion to approve, table, deny, recommend the council adopt resolution number 2024-XX.
27.
27 to, oh yeah, there's, to apply for the C4 LSA loan program.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion to second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The Centennial Circle irrigation, the dog bones. You know, I have total mixed emotions on this. The more I think about it, I don't know why we need to do it in the fall, when, if we're gonna do it at all, when we're gonna do it in the fall, all we're gonna do is have to turn off the water anyway, because it's gonna freeze the pipes. So, Ron, I'm sorry, you and I talked about this the other day, but the more I thought about it, what sense is it to put it in the fall when we don't have it budgeted? And, we're not gonna use them anyway. If we get them in October, November, we're not watering anything at that point anyway.
Well, my only point is, if you want to do it in the spring, is there a lag time between the construction and the planting, growing of the flowers, or can it all be done at the same time?
Everything's planted. I mean, when
matter
the
of
circle
what
and the
they
dog bones were replanted, we intentionally put in perennials instead of annuals. So, I mean, everything's planted already, that it should just come back naturally. In talking to Greg and Jim, it's not a 2-month project. It's a couple of days up to a week max.
Well, I would leave off the identity of what's growing there. There seems to be a lot of stuff there, but that's not a big issue. You can put tulips or daffodils, but not that junk that's in there now, so we can wait till that's, when it's done, you can plant whatever you want.
We could.
We can have
We
context.
we could change the plans if we need to, so.
When's it easiest for them to do the work though?
Honestly, probably spring, because we're going into leaf
Yeah,
season.
we're gonna be collecting leaves every
I just
out
think
of
that-
our new, by the way, I saw that, I did see it though tonight.
The sweeper.
Very excited.
Yeah, I was over there the other day.
So the idea would be, by the time the parade is parading, there should be flowers growing as opposed to bud.
Fair. Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion that we table this for now.
I'll second
Okay, we have a motion to second to table the Centennial Water, T-bones, stuff, dog bones, sorry, not T-bones.
She said work.
All those in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay.
I like T-bones.
All right, now we can smooth into the results.
Into the results, the abbreviated version. All right, cash position at the end of August, $10,246,000. You'll see that is a decrease of $2.6 million from the end of July. You can see the largest decrease is in the Pliget investments, where funds needed to be redeemed in order to pay for a number of capital projects. Interest rates at Tompkins remains in the 4 range. We already talked about the Pliget rates at the 5. We talked about the Pliget classes. Interest year-to-date totals $398,000. 28 has been paid in interest on the note, leaving net interest year-to-date at $361.
Do you remember what we budgeted for the interest payments?
I budgeted $108,000. I thought the note would be further advanced by now.
Okay.
Well, so that will not be a full budget number.
Woo-hoo.
For the month of August, revenues, not a lot of big items there. Net real estate taxes, $17,000. Other local taxes, $222,000. As I mentioned, a note advance of note advance number 10 for $261,000. Revenues for the month totaled $1,183,000, bringing the year-to-date revenues to $19,461,000. More than the prior year, obviously, because we have all the note advances in there, but a little less than budget because we haven't advanced as much as I thought we would have by this time of year.
Where do we stand? I don't want to make the calculation, but net the project, where would we be?
I will get those numbers for you.
Thank you.
Expenditures for the month of August, quite a few. In addition to the payment applications for the garage, the streets, the sewer, and the bridge, the police F-150 arrived, and that was $56,000. The parks mower, $51,000. Those 2 items were budgeted. Not budgeted was the vehicle for the fire chief at $45,000. The purchase of the fire apparatus for $1,062,000, and the purchase of the street sweeper for $332,000. So August was an expensive month. Expenditures totaled $4,063,000, bringing the year-to-date to $19,898,000, more than the prior year, and still less than budget because we did not advance. We did not have all the constructions out yet.
Again, I'd like to see that.
I will do that.
Thank you. You say share with the group, not just share.
Okay. August results. Believe it or not, expenditures exceeded revenue by $2.8 million, bringing our year-to-date deficit to $434,000. So obviously, a larger deficit than compared to last year, and still less than what was anticipated for the budget. When the $434,000 is deducted from the beginning of the year fund balance, the overall fund balance is $11,017,000, $2 million of which is reserved. At the end of August, there are open permit fees of $96,000, bringing our total unreserved with pending activity to $9,053,000.
Did you deduct the fire truck reserve from that 2 million, or is that
I did.
before or after?
Nope, I did deduct that.
That's after that.
Yep, when we look at the reserves, for the month of August, $10,000 was added to the MS4 as well as the bank
There it is.
Ike route maintenance. The purchase of the fire truck, that reserve from the prior sale was applied against the current purchase. There's a payment on the forest stewardship study of $13,000, and also a payment on the pedestrian bridge. So reserves were reduced for the month by $459,000, leaving the ending reserve bound at $2,059,000.
Okay.
Variances for the month of August.
Might be a few.
We bought a fire truck for $1,062,000, a street sweeper for $332,000. We did make payment to reimburse, I think that was Reading Orthopedic Associates for $5,000, as approved at the last meeting. We purchased the vehicle for the fire chief. There was a change order approved to add manholes to the West Lawn Interceptor project. I've not received any invoices for that project yet, but I did go back and capture what we've paid in engineering fees that we had not budgeted because we did not think that was gonna occur until next year, and that totaled $73,000 thus far. So overall, our negative budget variance for the current year is at $762,000.
Can't we talk about that Tuesday night?
Pardon?
I'll let you talk. Okay. Go ahead.
All right, tax collector reports collections during the month of August of $7,000, together with proceeds received from the prior month collection. The gross real estate taxes for the month of August total $13,000. Uncollected at the end of August is $244,000, or 4.3%. It's a little bit behind where we were last year percentage-wise.
That's for sure.
When that $13,000 is netted down by discounts, you add penalties, interim taxes, and delinquent taxes, the net real estate taxes for the month of August total $17,000. Year-to-date total $5,365,000. Local taxes collected during August total $222,000. Year-to-date total $4,045,000. Less than the prior year, but slightly ahead of where we had budgeted for the end of August. Real estate taxes, transfer tax continue to lag. Received in August of $29,000. Received today is $43,000 for the month of September, bringing our year-to-date total to $389,000, $77,000 less than the prior year. And with just 3 months remaining, unless there's a commercial sale, I doubt that we will reach our budgeted $600,000. Are you aware of anything that's?
A couple, but not that are gonna amount to that difference.
So we will be short of budget on real estate transfer taxes. On earned income tax received during August, $152,000. Received on Tuesday, $477,000 for what was collected in August, bringing our year-to-date total to $2,480,000, $111 ahead of where we were last year, and I believe we will slightly exceed our budget of $3.1 million. Mercantile tax for the month of August totaled just $8,000, bringing our year-to-date total to $1,366,000. I believe we will meet our Wilson budget. I believe the Wyomissing budget will fall short, however. Local services tax for the month of August, we received $32,000, received on Tuesday, $105,000, bringing our year-to-date total to $434,000, and I believe we will be right on target for our $580,000 budget. Any question on August revenues?
Are we getting any money from this building across the street yet? How much do we expect to get from them on a regular basis?
For what?
School,
But for
What kind of
what?
taxes we talking about?
whatever, any money.
Well, they're paying taxes now based on their current assessment. Do they ever do an assessment appeal while it was vacant? I'm not aware of one.
I'm aware of no, and while I've been told their long-term intent would be to claim nonprofit status and take it off the tax rolls, I'm not aware that's actually happened yet.
So they do plan to go nonprofit, claim nonprofit and get.
I mean, they claim that
Tax
for any
exemption.
property that they
So
own
does
throughout
that.
the Commonwealth.
See that?
That's gonna be a big hit.
How about the highways?
Yep,
See how nice we were?
big hit.
We already
Very
talked about the,
grateful
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
On the garage update, we already talked about the advances, what was paid and what's needed to cover the current month, payment apps. I just wanted to point out of the $300,000 in contingencies that we had budgeted, the updated total is now $244,000. So we are approaching what we had budgeted on contingencies. For the Bolton apps, during August, app number 8 was paid for $109,000. App number 9 for $111,947 was approved by the Infrastructure Committee and is pending council approval next week. During August, payment app number 3 was paid for fire protection for $26,000. For plumbing during August, payment app number 4 was paid for $58,000. App number 3 was paid for the HVAC for $54,000, and there have been no additional apps. It's too early in the month. There will likely be more at the infrastructure committee later this month. For electric, app number 3 was approved by the infrastructure committee for $161,732 and is pending council's approval next week. On sewer improvements, during August, the first app for the 24 televising and repair for $200,000 was paid during August. The next app was approved by the infrastructure committee for $25,000 and is pending council's approval next week. I understand on the pump station that the generator has arrived, but there's some issues with getting it connected with Med Ed. So the expected completion date has now been pushed out to November. The Woodland Road work has started, and a payment app is expected to be presented to the infrastructure committee, although I have not seen that yet. On the pedestrian bridge, the final construction app was paid for $5,700. The retainage on that project of $14,000 will not be paid until the culvert portion of that project is completed. So that will be a '25 budget item. On the street work, during August, app number 3 was paid for $162,000. App number 4 for $85,000. $319,000 was approved by the infrastructure committee and is pending council's approval next week. On the Stonehouse, the infrastructure committee approved the first app for $78,000. That is pending council's approval next week. They've also received the next app, number 2, and that is pending approval of the infrastructure committee later this month.
And on that project, when do we get reimbursed, or is that, I forget how we have that set up, is that our net number is $534,000, or we're getting money back for that, right?
We're getting approximately $460,000 in grant funding.
And when do we expect that?
We're providing information for reimbursement as quickly as we can.
That first payment request went in, I mean, Holly sent it last week. I was on vacation, so we both signed it this week and sent it back.
Yeah, the actual proof of payment can't be submitted until it's paid. If a council approves it on Tuesday, we'll pay it on Thursday, and then I can provide.
And how quickly do we get the money back, do you think?
The first reimbursement's usually the longest, and it takes, I don't know, 2 to 3 weeks from what we've seen before.
Yeah. We should start to see reimbursements.
So we should get the majority of it at least back in this calendar year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So total capital expenditures for the month of August, in addition to all the payment apps, the truck, there was an architectural fee paid for the fitness area at the fire department. The forest stewardship program of $13,000, the mower, some engineering fees at the pump station. Capital expenditures that were budgeted totaled $741,000, bringing our year-to-date total to $4,323,000. And that's all I've got for August. Any question on August results? Lots of activity. Mike?
Just for everybody's ears here, the street sweeper broke. The old one broke. So we bought a demo that we had already tried out, so it saved us a few bucks. Sort of like we're in a demo buying process with the fire truck.
Do you have receipt of the new sweeper?
Yeah.
Steve said he
I saw it the other day, it was pretty nice. Of course, I don't know what the hell it did, we know that Jim's budget's gonna be cut by $332,000, because that's something that he was probably projecting for next year's budget, but we're gonna have to cut it out of that next year, because that is, not only are we having a rough year gonna have a rough year next year, we've already been over budget on some of our items this year, but I do think what we've done is the right thing to do. I don't think we can leave the leaves out there on the street. We had to do it. You know, when we did the fire truck, we had
You have emergencies come up.
Yep.
For the 25 budget, the worksheets have been distributed to department heads.
Gives you a small one.
I asked that they be returned to be by next Friday. When we meet at our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is October 3rd, again, a real quick turnaround time for results. I hope to have some preliminary estimates for year end, and at that time, we can schedule our first budget meeting, and I'll come with some available dates.
Yeah, I'd like to be included in the budget meetings if possible.
It is a committee meeting.
It's the finance committee,
Okay.
so you're invited.
Thank you.
So at that time, we'll have to put it onto the agenda to schedule our special budget meetings.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else for the good of the committee? Hearing none, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.